I remember walking into the living room, the familiar hum of family chatter hitting me like a wave I wasn't ready for. The scent of my mother's perfume mixed with the faint aroma of the roast she had spent hours preparing, and yet, instead of comfort, I felt the familiar knot in my stomach tighten. My sister, perched elegantly on the velvet armchair, didn't waste a second before letting her words cut. "So, where's your husband and kids?" "Oh, right. You don't have any," she said, smirking like she'd just delivered a verdict from a throne. Laughter bubbled from my parents, sharp and knowing, and my cheeks burned hotter than the oven in the kitchen. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor and be anywhere else, but every step I took seemed louder, every breath more noticeable, as if the room itself was conspiring against me. I forced a smile, one that I knew was too thin to hide the tremor of hurt. Conversations buzzed around me, neighbors commenting on grandchildren, friends exchanging updates about marriages and promotions, and I was the glaring absence in the narrative. I wanted to speak up, to defend myself, but my words caught in my throat. Each laugh from my parents felt like another layer of weight pressing on me, suffocating, reminding me of every dinner, every holiday, every moment I had been quietly overlooked. My sister leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of being right. Her tone dipped in false concern. "Don't worry, it'll happen. Eventually. I just worry people might start thinking something's wrong with you." That single sentence sliced through me sharper than any argument could. I looked around for some sign of support, a glance from my father, a reassuring smile from my mother. But there was none. They were enraptured, laughing and nodding, treating my misery as a punchline. The room spun slightly, my stomach twisting, and I realized I was utterly alone in a place I should have felt safe. I excused myself for a moment, retreating to the hallway, letting the laughter echo behind me. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to steady the heat of humiliation, to quiet the sting of tears threatening to fall. Every holiday, every casual comment, every little jab from my sister suddenly replayed in my mind like a montage of small torments. And in that moment, standing alone in the hallway, I felt it fully. The outsider, the forgotten one, the one who didn't fit into their perfect little world. Yet somewhere deep down, a flicker of something else stirred. It was quiet, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A tiny spark that whispered that this story, my story, was far from over. I can still remember the way my parents' eyes lit up whenever my sister accomplished something, no matter how small. When she brought home her first A+ in school, they framed it, gushed over it, and invited relatives to celebrate. When I earned the same grade, it was a quiet, "good job," almost as if they'd forgotten to mention it. Birthdays were another battlefield. Her parties were lavish, filled with friends, gifts and attention, while mine were smaller, often interrupted by errands or chores they claimed I needed to learn responsibility. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that love wasn't measured by gifts or applause, but deep down, I felt the sting of neglect. Even beyond celebrations, favoritism seeped into every aspect of life. She was excused from chores or allowed to stay out late, while I scrubbed floors, folded laundry, and helped prepare meals for the family. I often wondered why my efforts seemed invisible, why my sacrifices never earned more than a passing comment. I learned early on to swallow my disappointment, to hide it behind a polite smile, because voicing frustration only drew criticism. I became an expert at being quiet, at blending into the background, a shadow of someone who mattered. School events brought their own brand of humiliation. I remember being left out of family photos or ignored at parent-teacher nights, while my sister's achievements were endlessly praised. I carried the subtle weight of comparison, the constant reminder that I was somehow less deserving, less special, less loved. Loneliness became my companion, and I learned to live with it, to accept that my needs, my joys, and my struggles were secondary. Every act of neglect, every favor given to her instead of me, etched itself into my memory, shaping my quiet determination to someday be noticed, to someday matter. I was passing by the living room when I caught my sister mid-conversation with a few of her friends. The words hit me like ice. Honestly, I don't know how she's still single. I mean, I've done everything right. Married, kids, promotions. She's just behind. Her laugh rang sharp, triumphant, and I froze. listening to every cutting syllable. I felt that familiar knot in my stomach, the one that had twisted through every family dinner and holiday gathering. But this time, it ignited something different. Anger, yes, but also clarity. A spark of determination flickered within me, small yet fierce, refusing to be snuffed out. As I stood there, I began to picture what my life could be, what it should be. I imagined walking into a room where heads turned not in pity or mockery, but in respect, admiration, maybe even envy. I saw myself achieving the things they assumed I would never have: financial independence, confidence, recognition. I imagined my sister's smug smirk faltering, replaced by disbelief or even fear, as I quietly outshone her in ways she hadn't anticipated. In that moment, I made a silent promise to myself. I would no longer be invisible, no longer the one laughed at or overlooked. Every slight, every whispered comparison, every dismissive glance became fuel. I didn't need to retaliate immediately. I just needed to plan, to rise, to transform the humiliation into a stepping stone for my own triumph. For the first time in years, I felt a rush of possibility, a sense that the story could finally be mine to write, and I intended to make it unforgettable. After that day, something inside me shifted. I stopped waiting for validation from the people who had never truly seen me and started investing in myself. I threw myself into my work with a focus I hadn't known I possessed. Late nights at the office, weekend workshops, and online courses became my new normal. Every task I completed, every project I led, felt like a quiet rebellion against the girl they had laughed at. Where I had once hesitated, doubted myself, and swallowed my voice, I now spoke with clarity and conviction. My efforts began to pay off. Promotions came faster than I expected, and recognition from colleagues and supervisors gave me a taste of the respect I had been craving for so long. I also explored side investments, small, calculated risks that my younger self would have deemed impossible. I researched stocks, real estate opportunities, and freelance ventures late into the night, fueled by the memory of every snide remark my sister had ever made. Slowly, the numbers on my bank statements began to grow, but more importantly, my confidence grew even faster. I felt the shift deep within, from the girl who had been laughed at, invisible and underestimated, to someone capable of controlling her own destiny. The contrast between then and now was almost dizzying. The shy, overlooked version of me, shrinking in family gatherings, was still alive somewhere inside, but she had been replaced by a woman who could quietly command attention without saying a word. I imagined the moment when my sister would see me not as the forgotten sibling, but as someone who had quietly, methodically surpassed her in every way she had once deemed essential. The thought made my chest tighten, not with pride that sought their approval, but with the thrill of knowing that one day, the world I had been excluded from would have to acknowledge me on my own terms. And in the quiet hours of early mornings, I began to sketch out a mental roadmap. This wasn't just about career or money. It was about reclaiming the dignity that had been stripped from me. Every small success, every calculated investment, every late night spent learning or planning was a brick in the foundation of the life I was determined to build. I knew the moment would come when their laughter would echo hollow, when the assumptions they had made about me would crumble under the weight of my transformation. That day, I realized, was coming closer with every choice I made, every door I opened for myself, and every chain of rejection I quietly broke. When the invitation arrived, neatly tucked into an envelope with familiar looping handwriting, my heart skipped a beat. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to avoid the familiar sting of comparison, the rehearsed jabs, the laughter I had learned to anticipate. But another part, a far louder, sharper part, thrilled at the opportunity. This time I wasn't going to shrink. I wasn't going to sink into the background and let their assumptions define me. I would attend, fully aware, fully prepared, and fully in control of how they would see me. As I held the invitation, memories of past dinners flooded back, the whispered comments, the rolling eyes, the subtle power plays that always left me feeling small. I felt that familiar flutter of anxiety, tight and insistent in my chest, but I pushed it aside, replacing it with a quiet, deliberate anticipation. For the first time, I imagined walking through the front door not as the ignored sibling, but as someone who had quietly amassed her own power, someone who could command attention without asking for it, I started to plan. How would I sit? What would I say? How could I let my presence speak before I even opened my mouth? I pictured their reactions, their polite surprise, the almost imperceptible shift in their demeanor when they realized that I was no longer the same person they had dismissed for so long. A small, thrilling shiver ran down my spine as I realized I was no longer attending out of obligation. I was attending with purpose. Each moment of anxiety transformed into strategic energy, fueling a careful, deliberate anticipation. This dinner would be different. This time, I would be the one quietly in control. And the thought of that reversal sent a pulse of exhilaration through me. I stood in front of my closet, staring at the rows of clothes as if they were weapons in a battle I had been training for all these years. My fingers hovered over a sleek, dark dress, the fabric whispering promises of elegance and quiet authority. Choosing it wasn't about vanity, it was a statement. Every accessory I added, from the subtle gold bracelet to the polished heels, was carefully calculated to convey confidence, success, and a presence they wouldn't be able to ignore. Let them see the woman I've become, I whispered to myself, imagining the shift in their eyes when I entered the room. I tried on a pair of earrings, twisting them in my fingers while running mental rehearsals of what I might say and how I might sit. I'll smile, but not too sweetly. I'll laugh, but not at their jokes. Let them feel the difference, I thought, a thrill running through me at the precision of my plan. The mirror reflected more than just my appearance. It reflected the transformation I had worked for, the quiet power I had built in the shadows. I practiced my posture, straightening my shoulders, lifting my chin, imagining how I would glide past the whispers and stares. They think I'm still the same, I muttered under my breath. They have no idea. Each detail was deliberate, from the way I held my bag to the light, confident steps I rehearsed. The dress, the accessories, even the faint scent of my perfume was part of the message. I was no longer the overlooked, underestimated girl. I was visible. I was formidable. I was ready, and when I walked into that room, every laugh at my expense in the past would meet the silent force of the woman I had become. I stepped through the doorway, feeling the familiar weight of eyes on me, but this time, the sensation was different. Instead of shrinking under their scrutiny, I held my head high, shoulders straight, moving with a quiet confidence I had cultivated over months of deliberate preparation. Conversations paused, forks hovered mid-air, and for a moment the room felt still. My sister's eyes flicked to me, her smirk faltering for just a fraction of a second before she forced it back into place. "Oh, you decided to join us," she said, voice lightly teasing, but I caught the hesitation. The subtle recognition that I was no longer the same girl she had mocked so many times before. The extended family's reactions were instantaneous and telling. Aunt Marjorie raised her eyebrows in surprise, whispering something to Uncle David, who shot a curious glance in my direction. Even my parents, usually quick to laugh at my expense, paused as if recalibrating, measuring the new presence before them. Each subtle shift, each delayed laugh, was a sign of the tension I had been building toward. I was no longer invisible. Every step I took toward the dining table carried a quiet authority, a hint that the dynamics of the room had shifted, and even my sister felt it. She tried to resume her usual mockery, forcing a smile and adding a sarcastic, "Looking fancy, trying to impress someone?" But her words rang hollow and I sensed her growing unease. I responded with a small, controlled smile, one that conveyed politeness without weakness, subtly asserting that I was no longer playing her game. The murmurs around the table grew, curious, anticipatory, and I could feel the tension thickening. I had arrived not just as a guest, but as a statement. The laughter that had once cut me down now hung in the air like fragile glass, waiting to shatter, and I could almost taste the shift that was coming. The moment where their assumptions about me would be dismantled piece by piece. As dinner progressed, I let my presence speak before I even opened my mouth. I listened to my sister chatter about her latest vacation, her new car, her recent promotion, and I nodded politely, asking questions that sounded casual but carried weight. "Oh, you went to Bali again?" "I actually just returned from a consulting project in Singapore and Thailand. It was exhausting but so worth it," I said lightly, letting the name drop of cities linger just long enough for their significance to register. My sister blinked, and I saw it. Her tiny, almost imperceptible hesitation. She had expected to dominate the conversation, to outshine me as always, and instead she had to pause, reassess. When the topic of work arose, I mentioned my recent promotion and the project I had led that had earned accolades at the office. I didn't boast. I spoke with calm confidence, letting the information land naturally. My parents shifted in their seats, eyebrows raised, mouths slightly open. The subtle shift in their demeanor was intoxicating. For years they had overlooked me, minimized my achievements, but now they couldn't help but notice. FOMO coursed through the room, unspoken but tangible. The realization that I had quietly built a life they hadn't accounted for. I added in a few remarks about recent personal accomplishments, strategically sprinkled into conversation, a charity event I'd organized, an award I'd received, a business opportunity I had successfully negotiated. Each mention was measured, casual enough to avoid overt confrontation, yet pointed enough that the undercurrent of comparison hummed loudly. My sister's forced smiles became tighter, her laughter slightly strained. I could see the tension mounting, the subtle panic behind her practiced confidence. The roles had shifted without a single raised voice or dramatic gesture. For the first time, the power in the room was mine, and it felt electrifying. As I sat there, observing the small shifts in the room, my mind drifted back to every moment I had been dismissed, every insult disguised as a joke, every birthday and holiday where I felt invisible. I remembered the years I had spent silently enduring comparisons, swallowing humiliation, and hiding the ache of loneliness behind polite smiles. The memories stung, but instead of weakening me, they now fueled a quiet, simmering satisfaction. Finally, in this very room, the girl who had been overlooked was being acknowledged. Not with pity, but with recognition of her strength and accomplishments. I could feel the psychological weight of being seen settling over me like a warm cloak. For years I had longed for acknowledgement, for someone, even my parents, to notice my worth, my growth. And now, as subtle as it was, their surprise, the flickers of hesitation in my sister's eyes, the slight pause in their laughter, all confirmed that I was no longer invisible. The satisfaction wasn't loud or dramatic yet, but it was deeply gratifying. I allowed myself a small smile, relishing the contrast between then and now, the stark difference between the ignored child and the empowered woman at the table. Yet even in this moment of internal triumph, anticipation coiled inside me like a spring. I knew this was only the beginning. The family dynamic had shifted, but the ultimate payoff, the moment where humiliation would meet consequence, was still ahead. Every glance, every subtle acknowledgement, every unspoken comparison built the tension, teasing a revelation that would leave the room irrevocably altered. The thrill of impending justice mixed with the quiet pride of my transformation, and for the first time in my life, I felt fully in control of the narrative, fully prepared for the moment when all the small victories would culminate in a dramatic, undeniable reversal. The room was buzzing with small talk, when I decided it was time to tilt the balance further. I cleared my throat gently, drawing their attention. "I actually have some news to share," I said, letting my calm, measured tone carry across the table. Conversation slowed, forks paused midair, and all eyes turned toward me. "I just got engaged," I added, watching as my words landed like stones. There was a collective intake of breath. My sister's fork nearly slipped from her hand, her carefully maintained smirk faltering. "Wait, what?" she managed, her voice tight, disbelief threading through it. "Yes," I continued, letting the thrill of control ripple through me. "He proposed last month, and we're planning a small wedding this fall. I can't wait for you all to meet him." The simple statement was layered with implications. I had moved forward in life, found love, and reached milestones she had assumed I would never touch. My parents' laughter, which had once followed every slight against me, fell silent. My mother's hand trembled slightly as she set down her glass, eyes wide with shock. My father, usually quick to make a sarcastic remark, simply stared, a flicker of awe crossing his face. My sister's voice wavered as she tried to regain control. "But how? I thought," she stammered. I smiled gently, allowing the pause to stretch, savoring the subtle reversal. It just took the right timing and the right person, I said lightly. Funny, isn't it, how life surprises us? She opened her mouth to reply, but no words could reclaim the moment. Around the table, whispers spread. Eyes darted between my calm confidence and her shaken composure. Even cousins and aunts exchanged glances, sensing that the hierarchy had subtly shifted. The satisfaction wasn't just in my announcement. It was in the silent acknowledgement that all the assumptions my sister and parents had made about me were wrong. Their faces betrayed it. Surprise, a twinge of envy, and the quiet realization that I was no longer the underestimated sibling. I had taken control, revealed my growth, and done it with a measured grace that made them squirm with awareness. The room was no longer the same. Their laughter and dominance no longer ruled the atmosphere. In that moment, the first dramatic public shift had occurred, and I could feel the tension building toward the even bigger reversal yet to come. The next day, I let the ripple of surprise continue to build. During casual conversation, I mentioned almost offhandedly, I just closed on my new condo downtown. The view is incredible. Can't wait for everyone to see it. The words felt simple, neutral even, but I could see the reactions unfolding immediately. My sister froze mid-bite, her eyes widening as she tried to mask her astonishment. "Wait, you bought a place? Here?" she stammered, her voice tight, faltering under the weight of reality. My parents exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable for a moment, before settling into a mixture of surprise and admiration. It wasn't just the condo. It was the implication behind it. I had worked for years, invested wisely, and quietly amassed a life they had assumed I'd never achieve. The contrast between then and now was palpable. Me, once ignored, now standing firmly in a place of social and economic power. The subtle envy in my sister's face fueled a quiet thrill inside me, I added with a calm smile. Yes, it took some planning and patience, but it feels amazing to finally have something of my own, you know? The room buzzed, whispers circulating like wildfire. Extended family asked questions about the purchase, and I answered with confidence, casually dropping details about the building, the neighborhood, and even a few interior design choices that suggested taste and sophistication. My sister tried to interject, to redirect attention back to her own accomplishments, but the momentum had shifted irrevocably. Each word I spoke reinforced the reality she had been forced to confront. I was no longer the same overlooked sibling. I had become someone whose life, achievements, and status demanded recognition. By the time dessert arrived, the atmosphere had completely transformed. I could feel the subtle tension, the mix of awe, envy, and disbelief in the room, and it was intoxicating. The audience, watching me quietly take my place at the top of this unspoken hierarchy, experienced the catharsis that comes from seeing injustice finally balanced. Every moment of past humiliation, every whisper and sneer, had led to this point. A revelation that combined strategy, patience, and personal growth into a powerful reversal, leaving my sister and parents unable to ignore the life I had built for myself. Later that evening, after the dinner had mostly ended, I found a moment to speak with my sister alone. We stepped out onto the quiet patio, the hum of distant voices from the rest of the family fading behind us. She turned toward me, her expression a mixture of disbelief and suppressed anger. I don't understand, she said, voice trembling. How did you... all of this? Her gaze darted between my engagement ring and the subtle elegance I carried so naturally, and I could see the swirl of emotions, shock, guilt, frustration, warring within her. I took a calm breath, letting the pause hang between us. You don't need to understand, I replied evenly. This isn't about proving anything to you. It's about me finally living my life, on my own terms, without being defined by your judgments or my parents' expectations. I watched her shift uncomfortably, realizing that my composure, my patience and measured words, carried a quiet authority she couldn't undermine with sarcasm or mockery. Her lips parted as she tried to respond, then closed again, the words failing her. You've changed, she finally admitted, voice low, almost begrudging. I didn't think you'd... I always thought... She trailed off, guilt flickering across her face, mingled with the sting of her own envy. I let her pause, letting the silence underscore the truth she hadn't faced before. I was no longer the overlooked, timid sister. "I have changed," I said softly but firmly. "I've grown, worked, and taken control of my life. And now, I'm done letting the past define me or letting your words wound me. I'm not seeking revenge. I'm seeking peace, dignity, and respect. That's the only victory I care about." Her eyes filled slightly, the first hint of humility breaking through her anger. I could see she understood, at least partially, that my triumph wasn't just material. It was moral and emotional. I turned back toward the house, leaving her with her thoughts, letting the moment linger. The confrontation had been subtle, controlled, and powerful. I had proven my growth without lowering myself to anger, demonstrating the full measure of personal and moral victory. As the evening drew to a close, I noticed the subtle yet undeniable shift in the room. Conversations that had once centered around my sister's accomplishments now included mentions of my engagement, my new condo, and the projects I had quietly excelled in. The laughter that had used to follow my missteps was gone, replaced by hesitant admiration, polite nods, and curious glances. Even my parents, who had laughed at my expense for so long, now studied me with a mixture of awe and cautious respect. Their smiles were slower, softer, carrying the weight of recognition they had long withheld. My sister sat across the table, visibly subdued. Her usual smirk was absent, replaced by a tense awareness that the hierarchy she had always assumed was permanent had quietly, completely, shifted. Every conversation she attempted to dominate was met with polite acknowledgement or gentle redirection from others, reinforcing the balance that had tilted in my favor. I felt a deep satisfaction, not from humiliation or revenge, but from the quiet justice of recognition, the karmic validation that those who had doubted me could no longer ignore my accomplishments or presence. I let myself enjoy the moment internally, relishing the sense of empowerment that came from years of preparation, resilience, and patience. Each subtle glance, each careful acknowledgement, confirmed that the person who had once been underestimated now commanded the room. The family dynamics had changed, permanently altered by my strategic growth and emotional strength. As the evening ended, I carried with me the quiet, resonant pride of someone who had transformed humiliation into validation, neglect into triumph, and invisibility into undeniable presence. It was a closing chapter that marked the beginning of a life where I stood fully recognized, fully empowered, and finally fully free. Later that night, after the house had quieted and the echoes of the evening faded, I sat alone in my room, letting the day settle over me. I thought about how far I had come. The quiet hours spent building my independence, the careful planning, the patience required to transform humiliation into triumph. I reflected on every slight, every sarcastic comment, every moment of neglect that had once felt unbearable. Now each memory carried a dual weight, the sting of the past and the proof of my own resilience. I had survived, grown, and emerged stronger, and that realization filled me with a profound sense of satisfaction. At the same time, I acknowledged the complexity of my family. My parents and sister were flawed, shaped by their own fears, prejudices, and expectations. Their laughter, envy, and favoritism had hurt me, but I now saw those flaws as separate from my worth. I had set boundaries, chosen my battles, and claimed my life on my own terms. The empowerment I felt was not just about social or financial victory. It was about emotional clarity, self-respect, and the knowledge that I could define my value independent of their approval. There was a quiet peace in that reflection, a bittersweet awareness that even love and family can coexist with cruelty and oversight. Yet, in that bittersweet balance, I found my own voice, my own strength, and the unmistakable proof that I could thrive without being diminished by those who once tried to define me. The journey had been painful, yes, but it had led to a truth that no joke, no mockery, no comparison could ever erase. I was seen, I was valued, and I was finally free.